Hey, welcome back to Invisible Machines. Fun episode today, an episode that kind of began back in season 1 on episode 9 when we had an incredible conversation with Jenna Fizel, who is the Director of User Experience with Machine Learning over at Google. And she was telling us about a bot over at IDEO where she used to work called Lotbot that was helping people find parking spaces in a tight parking lot. But it also managed to ruffle a few feathers. And Rob and I wanted to know more, obviously. So today we're having a great conversation with the people who built Lotbot. We have Danny DeRuntz, who's Executive Design Director over at IDEO. And then we're also speaking with Jenna Fizel, who is Senior Director of Emerging Technology. This is a cool one because it gets tactical. Rob and I wrote a whole book about designing experiences using conversational AI, but we haven't had a lot of chances to talk about what it looks like to do that work. So this one gets a little tactical. We talk about the way there's just a lot of design decisions that go into creating bots that can have all sorts of unintended consequences. And then there's the very notion of what happens when a bot like Lotbot, just keeps gaining more and more capabilities and sort of starts to resemble a digital twin of an organization, maybe a digital twin of IDEO that can do so many things. You start to wonder why it's called Lotbot anymore. And that kind of leads to the question of, when do the edges, or how do we maintain, I guess, sight of the edges, as there are just so many bots in our lives and all these bots are communicating with one another and things start to get a little fuzzy. Also, they start to get pretty interesting. So we dig into those topics and some other stuff too that's pretty fun. So stick around. And let's get into our conversation with Danny and Jenna. Well, Danny and Jenna, thanks so much for joining us on Invisible Machines. I feel like we have a lot of stuff that we could talk about. One thing that comes right to mind, though, when we were speaking with Jenna Fizel last season, she was talking about Lotbot, and specifically about some of the challenges that came up as Lotbot was given kind of a grumpy personality. And I think that would be really exciting to get into, but I think we'd also maybe, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to kind of the beginning of Lotbot, we'd love to kind of learn about how it was conceived and designed and iterated on a bit, because we do spend a lot of time talking about conversational AI on this podcast, but I don't think we've had any really good conversations that just kind of go nose to tail on a project like this. So if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to hear more about Lotbot.
Okay. Yeah, it feels like a century ago. Yeah, I used to work in this sort of like little group at a company, IDEO, where I work. They had a division called, an offer, if you will, called Collab. And it was like a collaborative sort of model of consulting where we would work for like a network of partners to work on more like ecosystem level challenges. And we were looking into lots of things about blockchain, AI, VR, etc. And I think we kept trying to, figure out this thing about digital twins. Like it's kind of like it's probably, maybe it'll come back like as metaverse picks up, but this idea of like objects that can have self ownership, which is like a sort of a blockchain conversation, and then like how could you interact and talk with them, which is sort of an AI thing. And we were like always having these struggles at our building with parking because it's like a super scarce resource. Only a few people have dedicated spots, and it was like really unpleasant for everybody involved to sort of like navigate that. Like you're basically asking, can I get a spot? Hopefully somebody who has one and didn't come in that day like would notify somebody of that. And then you're talking to like our experience folks who like help manage the our work experience, and like it's always kind of like it feels good when they can give you a spot, and it just felt kind of awful when they couldn't. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, let's just like take a crack at like giving this to a robot. And we had been doing experiments with computer vision. And I think it started with like this thing of gargoyles, which is like, can we just like train a camera in our parking lot and then like just know if there's spots and then talk to that camera essentially. Yeah, so I guess that's where it started. We initially made it like that. It was actually called Lotbot in the Cargwheels. And so it was a chatbot using Google's Dialogflow at the time, and it was a little Slack bot where everybody would talk about and discuss parking spaces. We just said, let's just move the whole thing right into that channel. And then we took the camera. A colleague, Todd Vanderling, he's like a computer vision expert, made the cargwheel, and the cargwheel you could also chat with. And so what happened is you'd say, hey, is there a spot available today? And the Lotbot would, I don't know why we did this. We could have just like figured it all out back end. But Lotbot would say, hey, cargwheels, are there any spots available? And then the cargwheel was like, I don't know, let me take a look. And then would look at the spot, and then it would talk back to Lotbot. And there was this idea of like, can we just expose the whole plumbing right into chat as if it was like people talking?
Yeah.
Anthropomorphizing the system.
Well, cargwheel is a great name too. You don't want to let that go.
Yeah. It did, like, unfortunately what happened is the cargwheel started to just like die off. At the time, the refractive properties of car paint made it kind of tricky to like to do all that we wished, like to be like, this is so-and-so's car, etc. I think these problems are like probably a little more behind us now, but the cargwheels have not made their relaunch. However, just the chatbot has. Yeah. So that was like the origin story of like spinning up a bot. And it used to be, I'd say like an hour and a half, it seemed like, of work each day for somebody to like navigate these really complicated matrixed calendaring systems.
Okay.
Keep track of spots. And it felt like, it's so easy for us, for a database thing, to just like figure out, I'm going to use the car from like, we never got this granular, but the thought, I just need it for 2 hours. That's like crazy for a person to manage all of that. Ad hoc, but for for a bot, no problem. Like, put the timestamp, somebody else asks and says a time, no problem. So yeah, so we used Dialogflow as just a normal chatbot, and then over time, it had always been spicy. And in Dialogflow, the way that it works is like it has like a small talk thing you could enable that lets people kind of like kick the tires on it. Like that. Everybody's gonna want to like test your
break the bot. Yeah.
And you can rewrite most of the small talk. So basically I would just go through it all and write all these sort of like almost memed versions of everything. And then had it like kind of militantly crack down on anybody who is trying to like do anything off script. So like we had the managers who needed to be able to like overrule the system and like assign parking spots, but we didn't want your general public telling people like it's not your spot. So what we didn't want at the time was like, I have spot 10, it's like mine, so I will give it to someone, which is chaos. So basically the bot would figure out if you're like an administrator, and if you are not, and you are telling people they could have your spot, it would kind of like rip into you a little.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, people, I feel like that was like the sticky favorite aspect of the bot, and people just like fight with it and argue with it and seem to really love that.
That's interesting, because my wife and I had a small business for a number of years, and there was a small parking lot in back, and it was kind of in a hard to park area of town. So it was like this coveted lot, and the lot attendant there was very aggressive, like very similar to how Lotbot sounds. I mean, it didn't take, about 10 minutes before he would stick something on your window that took, a razor blade and Goo Gone to remove. So that's interesting that you chose the anthropomorphized version that at least aligned with the parking attendant that I came to know quite well.
But parking spots are definitely a big time social currency. UC Berkeley, who's like our primary funder, for our company, is like that. Pretty much like, unless you're a laureate, you can't park on the campus. Like there's just a spot a parking area for these guys. So I'm not sure if they're more happy for becoming a laureate or for getting a parking spot on the campus. I'm not sure which one they take more pride in. So yeah, parking's a thing. It's a social like badge.
Yeah, and it was sensitive, you know? Like I think the premise, I did have like a little bit of a little thesis in it, which was like, it felt bad to tell people no. And I was like, I think we can tell them, I'm like, I think I can tell them no and they'll like it, which was basically like making the bot like a little bit like kind of weird about it, you know? Like,
man, there's so many things to break down there. So I'm just going to go through. I have like five things you just glossed over that I think are hugely profound. So the first one is that machines, like your IoT network, so to speak, was using natural language, and that you decided to have the cameras, in essence, speaking to the bot in natural language instead of using JSON. I wonder if at the time the implications of that, like you guys really like were aware of at that moment, to go like, whoa, wait, what just happened? No more APIs, all machines just talking, but in a way we can understand, so we can be in on the conversation as humans. Anyone can see what the camera said to another camera. Like, why shouldn't we be in on the conversation? I always use an example of like a tricycle with a 2-year-old, a truck, and a car all going to a blind intersection that's a stop sign. And if the tricycle was smart and the cars could all talk to each other, and they could just say, hey, I you know, I'm a tricycle with a 3-year-old that's out of control coming through this intersection, and both cars just stop. That's amazingly cool, and that's a world I think we'll be living in soon. But the idea that they all did it in natural language so that the parents could have been in on the conversation and now see that this is all happening in real time, and that humans are not excluded from the machine to machine conversation, has this huge trust component. And I think we just assume machines should talk to each other in the most efficient way. But why? Like, why can't they be both, right? It's kind of like the days we designed databases for a scarcity of storage and then kept those structures even as storage became cheap. You know, it's the same idea. Like, you know, we have bandwidth, we have fast processing, we have NLUs getting into the, you know, milliseconds of response time. Why can't we just slap natural language on our APIs, and we don't have to do integrations anymore, and we can explore functionality out there, and you can have multi-turn conversations. Like, I don't know if the camera was multi-turn. I doubt it needed to be, but it could have been like, hey, is this spot open? Which spot? Oh, spot, 7. No. Or I can't tell right now. I'm getting a reflection. Come back in 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, it comes back. Like this is like a profound shift in how all of our software works. Just something you threw in there and said, let's just have the camera talk. Was it something that afterwards you guys riffed on and went, oh my God, what if the whole world was like this? Or was it just sort of playing around?
I'm not going to pretend like I had, was thinking like that far ahead. as much as just like honestly wondering what it was like to see the plumbing. And then, yeah, I guess I had like sort of a small-minded approach there, in the sense of like, I wanted to not have to monitor the system like through all these like logs and cloud logs, and like it's kind of like hard to, like, if I'm going to make this thing, it'd be so nice if I can just like keep an eye on it by just being in the Slack channel. And like, it basically, all of its computer logging is just happening in the chat. So if it breaks, It's like the conversation is like wrong.
Right.
Like, so I guess like my real motivation was somewhat out of convenience, like I just wanted it to be a chat that I could like pay attention to.
Yeah.
I had the false theory that would make it so that many other people could like administrate it,
Right.
And
It's
I actually
inclusive
think
in a way, you know?
I thought it would lead to somebody saying, "Oh, I can manage Lotbot," but it like did not. It's still too.
Yeah.
We weren't there yet, and I do wonder now with the new paradigms, like, you know, to do real work on it, you do have to code. But now I do wonder if like the sort of window of people who could like inherit a tool like this.
Yeah. I mean, what if that camera shipped with the ability to talk? What if they just shipped it with the ability to talk so that you didn't have to, you know, create that interchange, right? That sort of, you had some conversion layer from API to natural language that you had to slap onto that camera, but why couldn't it just ship with natural language? With models today, it might even run on the processor that's in the camera itself, you know?
For sure.
And
And it was
like,
too. It was.
yeah, it's like crazy to think you just bring an object home and it starts talking to the other objects in your house, like, and that we could be in on that conversation. Like, shut up, guys, I'm trying to sleep. Like, you're talking to your lamp. It's just like having a conversation with your, you know, alarm clock, which is your phone, and it's like, hey, should I turn on in the morning? Like, this guy never seems to wake up on just the alarm itself. Yeah, let's try that tomorrow morning. You know. Oh wait, his pulse was a little too high. Let's try dimming the lights a little bit. And you're like, no, you guys, stop. Like, I'm fine. It's just imagining this like dialogue that sounds a lot like this podcast, but between me and like the objects in my house, and them talking to each other. It's just kind of a crazy world. And I think everything happens in that way. We're talking to Don Norman, like, and a lot of these ideas, they aren't born from this grand idea that, you know, that we all just, you know, suddenly, like, you imagine the whole world, you know, and its objects talking to each other, and then you created Lotbot to prove it out. It happens like exactly in the way you said, where you tried it, it just occurred to you, you know, to solve a problem, and then all of a sudden you just sort of stumbled onto something, and then someday you're on a podcast trying to explain your genius to everybody.
Unfortunately.
But that's how it goes with all these things. I was actually, I had a long discussion with the founder of Siri, and Adam Scher, and we're working on a Harvard Business Review article together, and you know, he was talking about the early days of Siri and all of the things that, you know, he had sort of designed and imagined, and a lot of it was stripped away when it got included in iOS, and you can see, you know, just how much was just a journey for him as well, and how many of these things were like intended. I think the first version of Siri before Apple bought it, they demoed this idea of looking at your email client through Siri, a conversational UI, and just constructing your emails and not needing to be in an email client and saying, yeah, this is the end of our apps, right? I'll just talk to a single UI on all of our software, and so to expand it, like, not just all of our software that humans interact with, but all of the software that machines interact with each other as well. You know, really all software being conversational is like just massive shift in how we leverage technology that I think no one could really even today see all of the ramifications of it. But it's funny how these things do start with parking space problem.
Yeah. I think there's this really interesting opportunity that I think we're right in the middle of with this expansion of understandability of component systems, right? Like, if I'm like sort of reflecting on the evolution of programming, going from ideas of like objects and inheritance to functions is a huge shift that has unlocked like tons of power. And paradigms like that original conception of Siri and things like the gargoyles talking to Lotbot, which talks to you.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, those are function calls, right? At a really like high level, abstract place.
Yeah.
And I think the sort of power of systems like large language models is going to help people, you know, not just speak in natural language, but also start to think of components of systems as performing jobs, as needing information to accomplish tasks, and maybe help everyone get sharper in their thinking about, you know, what is actually needed in order to accomplish something. So I think even though I suspect, and I personally am definitely speaking to my technology in words that feel closer to English than, you know, TypeScript these days, I guess I kind of hope that some of those more abstract mathematical concepts like leak into the public imagination and ways of being in the same way that we all know how to talk Google, because we've been learning how search works for so many years.
We've been talking about this a lot, and I think the precision of language, the English language versus coding, and I think it's kind of interesting. Like sometimes natural language is not precise enough, but then you kind of have to add this multi-turn component. So whenever we think of APIs or machines talking to machines, we always imagine it in a single turn, you know, one transaction. And so precision becomes more necessary because you only have one chance, right? So it's like you got to walk up to this person and you have one chance to tell them what you want. And if they don't understand you, that's it. Like next person, right? You don't get to have a dialogue with them. And, you know, we just take this for granted as, yeah, that makes sense, but it doesn't at all. Multi-turn APIs make a lot more sense where it says, oh no, I'm going to need this information. Like, you know, hey, you know, cargo oils, I need to know if a spot's available. And it's like, I don't know, who are you? Oh, I work for Pepsi. Like, yeah, these spots are only for IDEO employees. You know, these kinds of back and forth, and machines will need them too. And so I think designing these interactions to be multi-turn helps us with using language that's less precise, but also we talk about the precision of coding languages as being really valuable, and the fact that we had to invent them so that we have this precision when we know exactly what to say. Like whenever you start taking your, you know, computer science class and intro to coding, the first thing they teach you is how to slow down your thinking and be more granular about, you know, providing a very clear step-by-step instruction. Like it's not just go close the door, it's pull your chair out, stand up, left foot, right foot. Like you have to give all these very specific instructions, or else, you know, the machine's not going to know what to do. And so we go, okay, that's why we created these languages. The English language isn't precise enough, or we wouldn't have to invent these languages. But then you have the flip side to it, which is, oh my God, do I have to spell everything out for you? Like there's just things that we just the machine should just know. Like why do I have to be so precise on everything I say? So now we have finding this balance, which I think could be pretty interesting, where we get into hybrid languages of English and more precision, and, you know, like it should be interesting to see how this all goes. But I find it super fascinating. You're the first person I've ever talked to that actually decided to make the camera speak to the bot, to have that middle layer at that time. And I still have people that when I say, you know, we're facing the end of APIs, most people disagree with me, which actually boggles my mind. I don't understand how they can't see that. But yeah.
I do like the idea of like a certain. No, I was thinking about, you know, like the old version, like Lotbot has a thing that's like multi-turn built into it because it's using dialogue. Google's stuff has this thing called slot filling.
Yep.
And it's basically like it can tell which variables are missing, and it'll press for them. But what I've noticed with chat models, like one of my peers made this really awesome payphone, basically an arcade game that's a payphone. It's installed in a near a gas station in Chicago. And it's like full of like these techniques of multi-turn. Like it's basically the chat model is trying to get you to like, fill out a form essentially so that you can like navigate this game. And the mixture that he ended up using of like both, a little bit of these like dialogue routing mechanisms, but also just the chat model being aware you didn't answer the question yet. And the fact that it will press you for it. And,
Yes.
The way he writes to like not move forward until they've answered the question.
Right.
So it's kind of cool. And it's interesting how accessible this multi-turn thing is to everyone now. But you have to be thoughtful about it. You have to like, you're still programming it, but you're just, it's natural. I guess you're saying.
And as that camera increases in its functionality, it's just automatically available. Like you don't have to go, oh, let's integrate that new feature. It's just language. So as you just have to tell the system to ask for that new thing. Like, is it sunny? What's the weather? All of a sudden now it can offer that up without you having to, spend a week integrating this new functionality. This is a crazy thought. New cameras can be added. Other people could potentially from across the street add their camera into the conversation. It becomes super, super interesting. The other thing you mentioned, which is crazy to me, is digital twin. This is a concept again that I feel like is really, really leading edge at the moment, and I think you kind of mentioned it in a way like a lot of people think very anthropomorphic about digital twin, or even literal is probably a better word, where it's like a physical representation in the digital world of something. But I like to think of digital twins in more of like the digital version of something. So what is the digital version of IDEO? It's not a physical place with offices and doors. It's parking spaces, people, events, customers, projects. It's a lot of things that are not physical and tangible that can be portrayed in the physical world, which also could be doors and a map to an office. But this idea of the system having access to this twin parking spaces being just the beginning, and saying, hey, is there a desk available? Is there, like, you just can sort of, what I call it is going from low resolution to high resolution. Like parking spaces is a really, really low resolution digital twin of IDEO, right? It's just got the nodes in the graph that are like parking spaces. But what if you just keep feeding that more and more information about and that twin goes from low resolution to high resolution, and now all of a sudden Lotbot is managing projects and getting coverage for people who are sick, and like we can see how something so simple and such a simple start could just evolve into something so incredibly transformative. But from your opinion, like what prevents that from happening right now? Like why is Lotbot in lot jail?
In lot jail. I'm gonna try and kick over to Jenna, because like interestingly, a lot of the things you're saying are kind of like, they're really funny, because Jenna made a digital twin of IDEO with the whole.
Yeah.
Like as part of the, like, as we were thrust into Zoom, we kind of forget how much all that tech evolved.
Yeah.
But it was actually pretty sparse and like not that great for like a little bit. And so people were trying to figure out all these ways to like have presence again. So Jenna explored this, but also has set up and run an entire lab called, with other folks, I'm sure they can give attribution, called XR Wave, which is just like diving into all this metaverse.
Yeah.
Sort of challenge, right? There's technology, there's tools, there's new ways of thinking, and it kind of all like rotates around all this. But yeah,
I love
Jenna,
that
why-
idea
Yeah.
of like thinking about the metaverse as you could explore in VR, like through the physical like dimensions of things, but also language is a way to explore places too. Like,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah,
I think a lot. So there's like the practical reasons to augment physical spaces with digital information. There's tons of those. They're like really meaningful. But I think I have also, through this learning group, through even like, Danny, do you remember that pipeline visualization we made on that weird display we had left over from a project once? Like, if I'm thinking back on what has stuck with me, it's often the more like emotional or communal or transformative ways of combining digital and physical, or at least spatial and digital experiences together. And I think there's like very cool things you can do to reflect like emotion and adjacency with these tools. So that I did simulate a physical studio in a digital way. It sort of used the language of like board games and an axonometric projection, and then some relatively new tech at the time, WebRTC, to give people peer-to-peer connections to each other, and invited all of my colleagues to come, to our studio. I had relatively painstakingly recreated our carpet patterns and some other things that made the studio feel inhabited. And then I had my colleagues tell me what they remembered most about the space. And then I would model whatever those objects were, or if they had the skill, they would model those objects. And we incorporated them all into this place we could, for some level of meaning, inhabit together. And we would, you could have a meeting in there, or one day we all got together and we ended up playing Leapfrog, because the way that the avatars worked, the traversal was sort of like click somewhere and then you jumped to that position, and everyone realized you could literally play Leapfrog with each other, which was quite fun. And heartwarming, and I think you could argue not like terribly practically useful, but a way of being with other people,
right?
Mediated through this digital interface. That
who needs
really
practicality
anymore?
AIs are going to do everything for us, so we'll just go on Zoom and play Leapfrog.
Yeah, we'll do
with
the
each
fun
other.
stuff.
Yes.
I liked when Jenna also reminded me of you talking about like there's digital twin, and then there's just like this mutation of information. Like when you said pipeline, so you're gonna have to call us out. Like we might be using a lot of insider speak. Pipeline is just like the clients and things that we're going to be working with, or the opportunities, right? And like there was this notion in our studio that like it was really hard for people to like have a sense of like essentially all these opportunities that they could start to like ruminate on or get excited about. And so we just wanted to like turn that into like a vibe.
Okay.
And the idea was like we had this weird half moon display, super strange, very heavy structure up in our ceiling. And it was like, we're just going to put up all these like shapes of meaning that like will just sort of convey the energy of potential. It's kind of weird. But I guess like what's kind of interesting to me in that is just how all these new models in the generative AI space are really good at translating information.
No,
and it doesn't have to be like natural. It doesn't have to make sense, right? Like
right.
It can just change, and then it can hit you in a totally different way. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a explosive world. I mean, I think whenever we talk convergence, it's always really like, it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around that, because you have like, okay, wait, everything's going to talk to each other. Machines, humans, we're all just going to be in one big conversation. Our things are going to talk in that conversation to us. Great. but there's now going to be this like awareness of all those things to the physical world, like the work we're doing, the parking spaces, the carpet, the potentially the fading of the carpet, to your point, on the pathways that people walk, to know like which path they take most commonly, to one UI for all of our software, so we never have to pogo stick, and our kids are like, I don't know what an app is. And what do you mean, what's an app? Never heard of an app. Oh, it's this stupid thing we used to do where every piece of software had like a different interface, and you had like a 200 apps or 300 apps on your phone, and you had to remember like what app did what thing, and then you had to remember how to use it and where to go to forget it. Bottom line is we were morons. It took us forever. Like, we had the technology for a while to actually get rid of that, but we were just so used to pogo sticking between apps, and that it took us a while to like actually shed that. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's always been a choice. Like the fact that we have the architecture, the technical architectures that we have, not inevitable. Like the not making composable software, has a lot of like economic and historical reasoning behind it, but wasn't the vision of like all even operating systems. And I'm really excited by things like the level of adoption that ChatGPT has, because I think it really opens up like the economic possibility of shifting that paradigm, in addition to breaking open this accessibility of people to interact and make and more explicitly understand how the system goes together. But it was maybe not a choice, but not completely inevitable that we have this relatively opaque system that we have now. Like, we could have made it more legible. And I think it's exciting that we have the opportunity to push it in that direction now.
I'm so glad you brought up composability, because I think, again, in that whole convergence, you seem to be like playing all my favorite songs, digital twins, composable architectures. Composable architectures, to me, that it sort of unlocks this ability now for us to talk to machines using natural language and deploy things without being like, oh wait, IT has to get involved now. We have to provision 10 or 15 machines. How many people are going to use it? How many conversations do you think it's going to have? We have to run it through security, blah, 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 blah. Where now it can just be somebody like creating a spreadsheet. Someone's like, oh, I need a spreadsheet to do X. They create it. Oh, 1,000 other people want to use that spreadsheet. Like, Lotbot's a great example. And it's just immediately shareable and scalable, because your architecture doesn't need an architect to figure out how to deploy this. And yeah, it's this convergence of its awareness, and that kind of leads to like another thing, which I don't know if you guys have given much thought to, which is like ephemeral applications. So now we have like applications and code getting like created on the fly just for one-time use, which is like crazy in itself. So now I'm talking to the machine, it actually creates an application just to execute for that one command and then disappears. I don't know if that's something you guys have played with.
Okay, I want to go back for a second to the like frictionless deployment paradigm.
Yeah, please.
So I definitely want to believe in that future, but like, for example, last night Danny and I pair coded for, I don't know, half an hour to like fix a header mismatch problem to be able to hit an embeddings index in order to like make a new bot that's being worked on, have this new capability. And so like, I feel like I can kind of like see past the fog, and like I can aspire to a lot of these frictionless things, but in some ways I haven't felt them yet. And I think that there's, that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of intermediate benefits that I'm feeling and plenty of like ways I'm able to help, make technical work I do significantly more understandable to other people I'm collaborating with it on who are not necessarily, able to speak code. But I yearn for the composable future, and I'm not sure if we're going to get there or not, but I do hope that we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a continuum. We're getting there in an absolute way. Absolutely agreed. There's no way we'll see it in an absolute way. And it kind of comes down to probably that precision problem and the fact that, having machines that are generalized to do anything, doesn't really make sense, because that sounds limiting more than it sounds like expansive. But I think when you kind of combine this idea of natural language and machines talking natural language, it starts to unlock composability a lot more, because, now we're, the machine can say, hey, light up 5, run this Terraform script, write this Terraform script on the fly,
Yes,
and scale this up, and notify me if you're going to need more before you max out of space, right? So now it's like, watch my CloudWatch logs or wherever you're using, and, inform me of X, Y, and Z. So maybe there'll still be that like human component where they got to run in and plug something in, or, install something. But at least like 80% of it, we get out of that space of like, it's either 100% composable, because now it's like, it's either 100% composable, but 98 is just not at all, right? Like it has to be 100%. And that's,
yes.
Otherwise you miss the mark, and that's a tough mark to hit, as you pointed out.
Yeah, I think on the fly, like written glue code is super, super attractive, because that exactly tackles the problems that you're speaking about. And I think that, some of the maybe like core functionality, or like, what does that camera do? What does its existence mean? I also think there can be advantages to natural language, because you can state your intentions about the camera. Like, the camera is an object that understands the occupancy of this of this parking lot, and knows about its history, and maybe can predict some things about its future or something like that. Something like that could be the description of the object, and that could translate into the offering of services. And maybe those start with like, oh yeah, some image recognition algorithms run on a data feed of a video. But maybe it's something else in the future, but it still has that sort of like consistent and explicitly stated identity. I don't have like a practical example there yet, but that's definitely something I think about a lot. And, I hope to be able to inch towards in my work in the future.
Try to make up so the thing that we were just playing, it was like, so we're being grinding through is like, so, OpenAI is like the most accessible tool that we had been using, but then of course with like no fanfare, Google drops like all this enterprise level,
right,
like stuff, like in total silence with some documentation and some just sort of like automated. And we're digging into all that, and I'm just thinking about, to test this is like, even OpenAI just like released updates to 3.5 and 4 that like basically are kind of, it's not like you couldn't do it before, this idea of like talking to the model and it deploying a function.
Okay.
But they really explicitly made it so that it could return and like talk to functions at the same time that it's talking.
Isn't it?
And I think to test it, it's like, it wouldn't work I think it's cheating if we already write a bunch of functions and then it can simply call one. I think we need it to figure out what it needs to do to process the data, and then create a new Firebase function, like talking straight to the cloud with like, probably like danger level administrative privileges
Okay.
and like create and deploy like some kind of compute instance or function and then execute it to like just to freak ourselves out. But like yeah, it's kind of cool like how even that like little update I was like, it's interesting where they're trying to like make it just like encourage behavior.
Yeah.
I want to go to your ephemeral apps thing. That's my favorite, like I don't really know what's going to happen there, but like I started like my career doing blueprints for drafting.
Okay.
And so like we deeply believe that like, yeah, like if everybody's like, oh, it's optimistic, like the AI or it's not AI, the technology won't take our jobs. And like,
Right.
trust me, takes every job I've ever done. And like I'm an interaction designer, so I've spent like a lot of my time to like making buttons, like
Right.
doing visual interfaces. And the thing that's got me nervous is like in like a good way, I guess, is just this thought that like it's all just about moving information around and like, yeah, there's not going to be apps. Like the minute we had apps because it's like, hey, let's figure out how to charge everybody $1 and visit a website. But then the minute like you can like Apple or whoever can own the wallet and like move transactions out of apps, nobody needs apps to make money anymore. So like now you're just services and
Yeah.
And I think we all our heads popped a little with the ChatGPT, the plugins thing, just because it was like they're taking all that and tucking it inside of one interface. So it feels inevitable. It feels like a real moment to have to think hard about what skills like you'd need to design interactions.
Yep.
Because it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like I need to be a visual design expert, or the pressures are all different.
I can share a story. A while ago, I was on a team that kind of focused on the design of the Dreamliner cockpit, and that I always oversimplify the challenge, but it was basically Boeing saying, "Hey, we got a carbon fiber frame here, which means we have bigger windows and we've automated the crap out of this airplane. So we need more buttons to fit on less wall space." Oh, so then if you like Googled the 747 and the 787 now, you'd like see that the 787 is like 6 iPad looking screens. 747 is like buttons everywhere. Everywhere you can fit a button, there's a button or a knob or something. Our area was like the flight planning part of it. So the 2 iPad looking things on the very right that are actually mobile and you can carry them around. Pilots could do their flight planning instead of carrying these like huge briefcases around and stuff. And so what it was about was like putting the right buttons on the screens at the right time, because we had the flight plan. So we had this context engine where we could surface the right buttons on the screens. We wouldn't have changed those buttons into language. That wouldn't be right. Like the pressing of a button is still relevant in this whole scenario and remained relevant. And interesting to us, where language came in wasn't at the front of it, like, oh great, now you can talk to your airplane using natural language. Like, no, the first step was predictive. Like we had a flight plan. We knew like the system could guess what you were going to do next, or at least narrow down the options significantly enough that we can put it on a couple of screens. And if we failed to anticipate, or we didn't have enough context, which was like primary goal number A, was predict properly what they were going to do before they needed to do it. The fallback was language to go, we can't do that. We failed to predict. We failed to have the context to properly predict. Now I have to ask them so that I know what buttons to put up. Now that didn't get implemented because this was way back then, and no way natural language was going into 787. But I knew at that moment that, in a simulator, I was able to like take off and land a 787. I could never have done that in a 747. I had no flight training whatsoever. I was like, okay, the world's definitely going to change. Natural language comes in and I'm like, oh my God, this is like, we don't have a flight plan, like, except for like GPSs. We don't have a flight plan for our lives. So how is it going to get that context? How are we going to drive that context engine? Oh, great. Natural language now like can help fill that gap until the systems can predict better. Like, you don't have to come and see if there's a parking space available. I'm just going to like prompt you and say, hey, it's Tuesday. You go to the office around this time. There's a spot. Do you want me to grab it for you? Like you are like 1 inch away from, there's no way you didn't talk about that. Right. and so, yeah, I'm sort of, super interested in a world where what I call micro UIs are still embedded in the conversation. They're still threaded through it. We still have, it's the tufty stuff. Like there's just stuff that's data heavy that you want to put in as small a space as you can. And eyes are still a higher bandwidth than language. And so when we got to communicate a lot of data really fast, like visual is our answer to that. So I think it's just this, like, those visual elements don't need to be spread, like hidden across a phone behind apps. They just need to be embedded in the conversation. And so I think the apps are still there, essentially. They're just contextualizing the conversation and possibly drawn on the fly using some best practices. But I think in a lot of times not drawn on the fly because that human prediction machine is still going to need to be around for a long time in terms of like what you want to see and how you want to see it. And
yeah, I think this actually relates to some of the things we were talking about earlier, and also some reflections I have on some of my pre-IDEO work where I helped design and implement large interactive installations. So sort of like the pre-last week's meeting of spatial computing, like creating a bespoke interface embedded at an architectural scale that was meant to express some not intangible or non-physical information that was relevant to that space. And I think like that work was really satisfying, and it also took forever. Like we would start having a conversation with an institution who wanted to express something and had a space, and then we would, imagine the technology that we would need, and we would have to imagine the physical infrastructure to support that technology, and then we'd have to build all of it, and then we'd have to install it, and then we'd have to, test it with people along the way and see how it worked and make sure that the content could be updated. It was all so extraordinarily specific and laborious. And I think one really exciting leap forward is this ability to have the context be so fluid, the contextual understanding of where people are, what they want, and what their space around them can offer them, to hopefully make experiences that are just as rich as some of the ones that I worked on for places like museums and libraries, just be our normal environments that we walk around every day. Yeah, the like Xerox PARC dream of 1991.
Yeah.
We can finally get it.
So I want to circle back to that question I had, like Lotbot and Lotjail. What do you think, like, why hasn't it like expanded and like taken over, connected into the twin that you created, and started sort of expanding its scope? Is this just the case of like kind of no clients are going to pay for that?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely feel like you hit on, like, if I was worrying about like turning it into a product, it shouldn't be a chat bot. It should be a camera that chats. I definitely agree. I guess it's in lot jail because I'm personally anti like caring about like ambition. Sorry, don't quote me. I'm just like, because I have like there's Lotbot.
We'll beat that
there's
out.
and like, and I'm like, Lotbot's doing good, and I'm happy with the whole Lotbot. And I do enjoy sometimes introducing myself as like the parking lot manager at my job.
Yeah, you'd lose that
Yeah,
joke.
there's something about like mundane things that fascinates me, and like the idea of going after like the bigger thing is like, I don't know why, but I feel like it is a pollutant because
Got it.
we're always looking for the bigger idea, and I keep thinking with all the AI stuff, I'm like, yeah, but what can it do for like that's not important? and like I actually think I don't like, I'm not super articulate around this, but I'm just like, I feel like that might be really important, you know, changing the like, little like everyday things.
I so agree.
Yeah, and like that's not where the conversation tends to like hover, right? It's around places where all the value is flowing. So a lot of the conversations around AI tend to like move around, you know, like productivity tools, like which is to me just like obvious, like
Right.
because you get paid, like it's close to the transaction, like that's where money exchanges is around productivity and stuff. So we're talking about it around really close to money, and I'm like, the phrase that I really like that relates to ephemeral apps and to AI and to all this, I think, is like, I made it myself. I'm not a developer. Thank goodness that people like Jenna exist near me, right, to help me. And I won't deny that this is a crazy moment to be like that, because the co-pilot factor of AI is awesome. But this phrase folk UI or folk AI, this idea just everybody can just whip up their own, is like exciting. And so like to me, the idea is I made Lotbot and I will delete Lotbot and somebody else will make something else. It is exciting. Lotbot might just be an ephemeral app, is like, I guess, the answer.
It seems like there could be a flip side, though, where like Lotbot starts gaining more and more capabilities that are at first tangential to the lot and then kind of start branching out. Like it's, you know, helping incoming clients with a rental car and where they should stop to get breakfast on their way to their parking spot, which kind of raises a couple of interesting questions, because you mentioned earlier, like you had Lotbot and the Gargoyle kind of existing as separate bots. But then when you have, like if Lotbot all of a sudden had like a whole big suite of skills, like is it still Lotbot or is it something bigger? And we talk about this a bit in the book, like the idea of a concierge bot, which is a bot, like ideally that would be there to like guide people to the right sub-bot, but does that sub-bot need a name? Like the concierge figures out what they need and can connect them with a bot to do that. But yeah, it becomes this weird question of how you're going to parse up all your bots and how do you talk about your bots and what do you call them all?
Yeah. I think that's actually like a really interesting connection back to like questions about composability and what it means for some of these technical processes to suddenly be way more accessible. Like I suspect that there's value in exposing the system and helping people like grapple with how the parts actually work and speak to each other, and then therefore be able to give input and redesign where those boundaries actually exist. So one of the reasons why I love having the Gargoyle and the Lotbot is that you get not just, you know, people who have access to the back end, but everybody who interacts with it a little bit more understanding. Now, obviously, like you don't want to, you need to chunk things at some point. But I do think that like some of this anthropomorphization stuff can be really helpful when it's in service of understanding how the system works, right? Like we think of our cats as people in some ways, and we think of our Roombas as people in some ways, and you know, generally useful ways. And I think that there's an opportunity to leverage our like understanding of other people to get better comprehension of these more abstract technical systems now too with natural language.
Yeah, we have like rants about the anti-anthropomorphism sort of talk, because it's just like basically by telling people not to anthropomorphize things, all humans understand things at the end of the day through metaphor.
Right.
And you're basically just trying to remove like a very useful way to understand things from people. But can I say anthropomorphically why I like Lotbot getting more skills is like, that is such a funny like story of like this bot with humble origins.
Yeah.
Started out in the mailroom
as
and made its way up to the C-suite.
Yeah, I think it needs to always be spinning the same like instance and then like eventually run the company.
But it's still called Lotbot. It's
still Lotbot.
Yeah. Danny, that's an ambition I think we can both get behind.
Yeah.
Lotbot for C-suite.
Yeah, or
Running the company.
In 2028.
orchestrate the Lotbot takeover.
Succession.
Yeah.
Succession.
Yeah. You got 3 bots jockeying for control.
Yeah, there's 3 bots fighting over the future CEO position at IDEO.
Well, like, anthropomorphism is really interesting to us. We talk about it a lot, and I think in the case of Lotbot, there are some interesting points because there is something like strangely comforting about a grouchy parking lot attendant. And so the fact that Lotbot was sounds like he was a little, or it was a little cantankerous, makes sense in a way. But if I understand it right, like Lotbot did kind of turn a corner with some people in terms of like how they were perceiving it as having an agenda or like these human-like traits, which can become problematic too. So it is that fine line, right, that you're always trying to kind of walk there.
So I think we should get into that, but I think an even more interesting thing has happened because of the flexibility of our new large language model tools, and that's that Danny started sourcing the personality of Lotbot from the community. So community members were able to like describe the way they would like Lotbot to act, and then Danny could easily prompt engineer that into the bot itself, and then there would be this interesting crossfade moment where it shifted personalities and sort of everyone could see that and participate in Lotbot's existence in this pretty compelling way.
Favorite weird side effect that it got it was so weird was Lotbot was really grumpy. Then I had it be like a shoegazer because in the old model it was safe grumpy because I wrote every possible you write 15 versions of a sentence thing. With the LLMs, it's like I ran into this issue where I tell it to I only tell it to be a jerk, basically, right? Like on borderline, like hostile almost. I didn't use that language. I just said be very grumpy, right? Like all caps, etc. And like categorically, if you're like carving up the internet of all possible human phrases and ways of being, it was just going to be grumpy about every little thing in your sentence. And that meant if you didn't speak English, but it saw English before, that's a difference. And that's something it can be annoyed about, right? And so it would call it out. And it started saying, just being racist. So like one of the points, it didn't happen to anybody yet, but I DM'd it because I was like, whoa, this thing's like really, it's just like so reactive. So I was DMing it and I said, can I get a parking spot? But I said it in Spanish. And it just replied to me. It said, no habla español, speak English or I'll tow your car.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, shoot. Like, I'm sorry, I'm laughing. It is funny because it was like, what the heck? Just because like that's such a real way to be a racist jerk. It's like surprising. Yeah. So basically I'm like, oh man, like how hard is this going to be to fix? And like, does that mean I can't even do grumpy anymore, et cetera? Like there's all these wishes that I had. I don't want to be like, I don't like these like little, the bot like fakes all nice or acts all neutral. I do not enjoy that they lobotomized Bing, et cetera.
Right.
So basically, Jenna and I had a conversation around how intentional we have to be. And I'm like, oh, it's like, of course, to understand it anthropomorphically. And like, right, if you have a kid and you tell your kid to be a jerk, or you tell your kid how to be in life. You tell them things to not be, or you
Right.
mention you can do some things, right? So basically, if you're going to tell a bot to be grumpy, you need to like suggest boundaries there because it has none, right? Like it's not like its default to just be grumpy. You're telling it to be. What do you mean by grumpy?
Right.
So it was pretty simple. Like for solving that one problem was like, you're a very grumpy multilingual chatbot. And the minute I added that word multilingual, like after exploring some other things, it just like no longer complained about people speaking other languages, and it actually enjoyed mixing in languages. And so it's just this, it's like a very simple example of like how much more intentional you have to be. If you're going to like play with it and go there, you're going to really have to be careful. Like,
Yeah.
the chat GPT will tell you like grumpy yet lighthearted.
Yeah.
You kind of got to like be really explicit.
You want the lovable
things.
crank
Jenna,
archetype.
I don't know, Jenna, if you're connecting in the same way I am with this, but it's just like, oh wait, that's coding. Prompting is just coding. This is It's just, oh, you got to be precise in your code. Oh, good idea. Let's do that. And the only reason we're not precise is because it's language, right? And so we're used to not being precise. And so we're dropping, as programmers, we sort of drop the precision just because we change language. But to your point, some level of precision is still necessary. And then the prediction, right? Like, I don't think only a human had a chance at predicting that would happen. Not that a human could in all cases, but the idea that system could be designed to have predicted what that outcome for you is far-fetched. But now you could, on any other system you built, you could see like, oh, there's a level of precision that you need to hit with your prompting, and you could look at a prompt and say, not precise enough. You could look at a prompt and say, too precise. And so we're like, oh, wow, is prompt engineering just coding? I mean,
well, I think this is like, okay, I'm like very excited about this, and I'm also not sure of the real impact or outcome in the real world, but I am super stoked to think that in the same way that like I can write a computer program and execute it, and I have to be precise enough for my environment to actually, run it, and I can see the output and check if it met my expectations or not, or even write a system to check for me. With large language models, we can potentially write down relatively precisely, but in understandable language, what our intentions are. Like, if we want to be multilingual, if we want to be accepting of whatever different characteristics of people we want to be accepting of, or different language styles, or different levels of education, or whatever, different times of day. But we might need to understand how to actually write down those intentions specifically, and then see what happens. It's not just like a abstract mission statement. It's not just don't be evil, right? We have to actually get specific about what we mean, and then see the consequences of meeting those things.
right.
And yeah, I'm hoping that some of the like joy I get out of things like debugging can translate into really helping people think through their value systems, and how they or their organizations want to be in the world.
I mean, it's interesting from a language standpoint, as you pointed out, like asking somebody to speak English because you don't understand their language in a polite way is okay. Asking somebody to speak English because you don't understand their language in a rude way is not okay, and is racist. Right? But asking them to change language is not in itself inherently racist.
Yeah.
And so, like, threading that needle.
It seems like it's all about providing context, right? And now we have so many more opportunities to go in and provide systems with relevant context that could be general context about how you interact with anyone in a client group or an employee group, but then it can start funneling down. Like, this person prefers to be interacted with in this manner, and here's some things that you should
Yeah.
be aware of when asking them certain questions.
And this is why I kind of am a big believer in, like, I'm sort of like, you know, I really don't believe in the concept of general intelligence as like a single algorithm that's going to rule everything. I really just see that Lotbot will exist and somebody will tune it with the nuances of that skill, and then people will create other skills. Skills will just ephemerally appear, but all within context, designed in context, and then they'll just appear in a UI that's holistic, that makes it appear like it's a singularity, but there's no singularity at all that really happened, other than the fact that everything's talking in one language, which is the same kind of singularity that would happen if the whole world spoke. Oh wait, what's that language?
Pigeon? Pigeon?
We could go
Esperanto.
pigeon.
Esperanto, yeah, that's right.
Esperanto, yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell. You know, the thing that happened right after the Lotbot thing is like I made some more prototypes, but like out of concern, like I was gonna make them so people could like talk to them, you know, and like there's a hotline, like a phone number you could call for like a critique or something. And like the thing that I started creating after realizing what can happen, it's really hard for me to predict all of the things that somebody could sort of prompt, right? And this idea of like saying multilingual is like, I've solved one bug that I've discovered, but I don't know all of them, right? And that's the other challenge with Lotbot at scale, grumpy Lotbot at scale. But I ended up creating, I'm sure I'd be really interested to learn about this. I don't know anything about a human mind when you say think before you speak, like which parts of your brain are firing off, but I'm going to bet they're not the same part.
Yeah.
And like, basically what I was doing was like, okay, I'm going to take whatever the text you do. OpenAI has a free moderation endpoint that checks for like hate, all sorts of like basic filters. First, hit that. If it passes that test, then I'll let it engage with the normal chatbot, if you will. Then the chatbot will reply. Then I'm going to send that out for evaluation again. You know, like by this third-party service. Then it's going to come back and give me the okay. Then I will talk.
Yeah.
And that's a very software way to think. And I think even if we think we get rid of it's all NLP, the only reason we're going to be able to do that is because we've forfeited all of those controls to a company like an OpenAI who's doing all. Like the only way they're gonna pull this off and not get in trouble all the time is like they're doing all those like round trips.
Right.
And like I'm still like up in the air of like, do I want to sort of like do I want to know how to do those myself or not?
Yeah.
And then there's like all these, you know, but what if everybody, most of our conversations are predicated on not trusting everybody with all these tools. So
did you guys ever, I don't know if, I'm always looking for good ideas here. I think one of the biggest challenges with a single UI on all your software, even if that UI is embedded with micro UIs, discovery. So the moment that, you know, you add a feature, the nice thing about graphical UIs is you add a feature and in a lot of cases you can see it. And so you can, that whole browse and find and explore that you can do visually, and you're like, oh, this is new. And in conversation, you know, that's really tough. And so one day you try something, it doesn't work. You don't keep trying it to see if someday that functionality was added. And, you know, I've positioned this to a lot of folks, like still looking for the silver bullet on this one. Have you guys seen any or tried anything that really you thought was a super clever solution to this?
Okay, so this is kind of like basic and ancient, but I like to think about command line interfaces and the power that they can have.
Great model,
in especially professional tools, right? Like I'm among among other programs that I used heavily, I use Rhino, which is a 3D modeling tool. And the way that I learn about new releases of Rhino, and actually the way I learned it first, was I read the command list and I just learned its words. And I didn't remember all of them, but they all sort of like washed over my brain. And then actually I was able to later, when I was thinking about like, oh, I wish I could interact with points in this way, because they're relatively well-named commands, I would think back to my, previous perusal and get inspired to try something. And honestly, a way that felt much more natural to me than menu diving. I think menu diving is kind of like the opposite trap in discoverability from, only using conversation or words. And I do think there's an opportunity to kind of converge concepts that people already use in their everyday language with what you want to offer through your interface, and let discovery be, understanding similarities between existing interactions and the sort of slightly new ones that you're hoping for. What does that do to like actually new paradigm shifting capabilities or features or ideas? I'm not sure. I don't think that solves for that.
Right.
But I think leveraging general understanding can really help a lot.
The Rhino example is kind of awesome because it is like a search model almost, or like, I guess like I just typed. I've never used the menus in it. You just start typing the word that you hope happens. Like, man, it would be so nice if that tool would be updated with like a more semantic, you could just describe what you want to happen. And yes, the thing that's exciting about all of this is like, so if we can go totally pure Siri, I don't think we will. It's like nature has both deciduous tree. It has both flowers that come and go and rocks. And so like, this is why it's like a pretty good moment to be an architect, because it's like there's buildings. We don't know what the new container will want to be. There's furniture. You can like move it in and out. And then there's just like food and stuff, or flowers that just die and go away. And I guess we don't know what any of it's going to be now, because like the fact that it could all be reduced to like a total mobile town, like there's nothing fixed. That's probably not going to be true, but like the fact that you can move the town and like set up the wells somewhere else, like kind of an exciting time. Like maybe we need this moment for everything to just like evaporate for a second. I wish this would happen with everything. I wish all of our Slack channels would get deleted. Salesforce, I think Salesforce did this thing that was awesome to me where they like canceled all meetings at the beginning of the year. And I'm like, yes, societal. Everybody
Reset.
get the zero in.
Everyone out of the pool. Yeah.
It feels like there's a possibility too where people will probably become accustomed to interacting through conversational interfaces with certain brands or companies they interact with every day. But then it seems likely that at some point people will start kind of having their own little OSs that manage their own lives. And then how do those overlap? Like if I'd rather speak with my own personal assistant that can then talk to all these other bots or interact with these other companies, do I even care that they have an interface that's available to me? And I suppose that seems like it's like a blanketing thing, but then there's all sorts of lumps under that blanket.
Yeah, I think there's like, that brings up for me questions of like understanding your identity. So we talked briefly earlier about the bot that rewrites my own speech in certain Slack channels, and like I know where that code is. Like I can it's actually open in a tab somewhere in my computer right now. I can read it and understand it as like not part of me, but also it genuinely feels like part of me in some significant way. So as we develop, these our own personal operating systems or ways of interacting with this information, like where will we be cutting our mental models for who I am and who you are? And I mean, I suspect that might be a more fluid boundary, and maybe it can even come to encompass other humans more or less over time.
Wait, if you lose connectivity, are you just lost in the middle of nowhere? Rob uses the GPS model a lot. Like if you're just driving using GPS and not totally paying attention, and then it cuts out, you're sort of like adrift.
I don't know what to eat for dinner.
Totally.
I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. People just standing still, looking around, lost.
Shoegazing.
Like
I use it for shopping, for like figuring out like groceries and like food plan, and I get nervous actually. It was so good, and now I'm worried.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, extended cognition isn't like a new idea, right?
No.
There's like the Clark and Chalmers stuff from the 90s.
Yeah.
But like I wear things on my body.
Yeah.
I have like a hormonal implant in my arm. I'm surrounded by all of these interfaces that feel in some ways like extensions of my body.
And still you make your own
Yeah,
clothes.
I don't know. Yeah. In fact, I get my computers to help me make them quite a bit.
Maybe that's the future right there. Like that's what you can be paid to make your own clothes. I have my thought, and I think it's a big problem. I think it's a big problem discovery. I think it's a hard problem to solve. But I do have a proposal for what might work, and it kind of dates back to my work with the Boeing, right? Like if I can automate that airplane, we could automate a lot of things. So, and it came down to that kind of combining what you guys said, the digital twin meets Lotbot. And if the digital twin can now give Lotbot the context to predict that prediction, like you don't have to ask for a spot. I can start like offering up things I can do. That's how you can discover new things, is not by waiting for people to request them, but by getting ahead of those things. I know that's super annoying when it gets it wrong. It's like autocomplete, like your friend that can finish your sentences, but wrong. But it's obviously that's a careful thing. We gotta thread that needle on, but I think that prediction is kind of where it lies, is waking up and it offering, because I think it's what we do as humans. Like you learn something new and you offer it at the right time, though. You don't just well, I guess on Facebook they just post it now, and it's just like, hey, I can
I
can now knit sweaters. Great, can I have one? But yeah, I think it might be an answer, is that context. I don't know.
Totally. I mean, that reminds me of like Patty Mays at the Media Lab. I took like one class from her many years ago, but that sort of just-in-time interface was a big theme of, how can we understand enough to provide that extra information or context to help the person, perform their next task just before they need access.
It's a powerful, it's like, when you feel like somebody's anticipating your needs, that's like also a way that somebody may or may not like think that you care for them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like it
really
touches
you
people.
get me. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I think when technology does that, it's inevitable that people are feeling that feel. If they can get mad at you when a human doesn't do it or something, then they're going to have the same reverse feeling when like their Roomba does, right? So
yeah.
It's funny. It's like another level of like, that's when we go from like liking our technology to loving it, like genuinely loving it, because it predicts exactly what you wanted right before you wanted it.
Yeah,
and you didn't have to ask.
You.
Yeah.
And I guess that makes like discoverability.
That's like a show of love, right?
Yeah, discoverability is just intrinsically linked to providing context. Like you got to show these new features and capabilities at the right time.
Yeah,
and people will remember them and use them, perhaps. But
well, we talked about love, digital twins, machines talking, discovery. We could probably keep going on for the rest of the day, but I know everybody's got stuff to do and bots to build.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. I guess we
You
have
sure
to get
do.
gargoyles going again. So
Yeah, it was a beautiful conversation,
Yes.
though. We really, really appreciate both of you taking the
Yeah.
time to be with us today.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great.
thank you.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Great. Love how deep you guys are into this. Just really, really cool.
Yeah, I feel like we should pick up these threads again sometime soon.
Sure. We'll do something with gargoyles and ping you.
Yeah, let us know.
Awesome.
You'll get a gargoyle.
Sounds great. See everybody.
Bye.
All right, thanks again for hanging out with us right here on Invisible Machines. Please subscribe to UX Magazine wherever you get your podcasts so that you can hear new episodes as soon as they come out. If you want to watch new episodes, and I recommend you do, the video feeds are really pretty amazing. Follow the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. And I think that's all I have for you this week. So let's go ahead and look forward to next week when we will connect again right here on Invisible Machines.